Here's the goal in cross-examination.
Yeah, okay.
Tear the person down,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
It's great to hear that from my boss.
It's going to be...
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. My name is Jody Avirgan. This week it's time for another 538 debate. We did this once before. We will each be assigned a position to argue, and we will do our best to make the case. Just a quick recap. I think it was pretty obvious I won the last one, but, we'll see what happens this week.
Jokes.
This time the question is, how should Democrats approach the issue of impeachment? And we have all been assigned a position, and we will debate that. The people here for our debate-orama: Nate Silver.
Hey, guys.
Editor-in-Chief. Hi, Nate. Welcome back.
I know, it's been a couple weeks since I've been on the podcast.
Yeah, because that's what happens when you take 1 week off. Then it's been a couple weeks since you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to see you.
To get the House model ready, and then up in Maine's 2nd Congressional District, where I did not see a single sign of support for Trump.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like a literal sign or a sign?
No, literally, like I saw one sign for, what's his name, Eric Brakey, like the slightly eccentric Republican candidate for Senate.
Trump's
Why
not
would
on
there
the
be
ballot
signs for
anywhere.
Trump?
Yeah.
But like you would think you'd see a bumper sticker or something, right?
Yeah.
There was no sign of
Okay, Peggy
support.
Noonan, take it easy, all right?
Here as well, Claire Malone, senior politics writer. Hello.
Hey, Jody.
And managing editor, Micah Cohen. Hello, Micah.
It's starting to, I like the ring of that.
The managing editor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it'll
You're
distract
managing.
people from the fact that your name sounds almost exactly like Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen, and then did you guys see there was a Micah Cohen arrested in Chicago, man arrested for threatening conference where Jeff Sessions said lock her up. His name? Micah Cohen.
You found this because you Google yourself several times a day? You have a Google alert for your own name?
My friend has a Google alert for my name and sent it to me.
It's only true friends do that.
Exactly.
Our mothers.
So in addition to the debate on today's show, we're also going to preview Tuesday's primaries in Arizona and Florida, which are two key states for control of the Senate. And before we get to any of that, maybe I thought we could take a few minutes to talk about the death of John McCain. Claire, you wrote his obituary for the site that went up over the weekend. He had a reputation for bucking his party, for being independent. Is that kind of the main way to look at his legacy? And does that make him stand out within the current Republican Party?
Yeah, I think John McCain has a complicated political legacy in some ways. We certainly took a look at his political life kind of post 2000 presidential run, which is sort of when, he owned the Maverick label a little bit more. He was pretty critical during the Bush years of the administration's use of torture, while also being very supportive of the initial invasion of Iraq. And I think later on in his career, after the 2008 election, you saw John McCain very much kind of hewing to the Republican line. He became pretty, I don't know if I should say hawkish on immigration, but during his re-elects, he certainly was catering to the vociferous sort of nativism of the Republican Party. And you're certainly seeing that being recognized by, I think John McCain in general has gotten a little bit of the hagiographic treatment by the political universe. But then you'll also see people who are saying, listen, he introduced us to the sort of racialized politics of Sarah Palin and then sort of rolling into the immigration stuff. So I think it's interesting. It's hard to place a sainthood on a politician because politicians are politicians and they take positions to win. So he did have like a mavericky reputation that was during the Trump years burnished once again, kind of a little bit of a flashback because obviously McCain very much bumped heads with Trump.
The Palin episode to me encapsulates McCain in that he puts Palin on the ticket because someone convinces him that's the best way to win. And then he lets the craziness go on for a while, and she's saying all types of sort of race baiting things and he doesn't say anything. And then at the end he says something and he pushes back and he kind of has this moment of principle. And that to me is McCain. I mean, look, let's not mince words here. McCain started bucking the GOP in the run-up to 2000.
When he wanted to make a splash.
Right, when he was going to be running against George W. Bush. He knew George W. Bush would have the establishment Republicans behind him. He needed another lane to go in. Then, before 2008, he's going to be in that establishment lane. He starts towing the party line. I'm not saying that to criticize him. I'm just saying it's like he's a politician.
It's what politicians do.
It's what politicians do. Now, within that, He was a freaking war hero. And within being a politician, he was a fairly principled politician as far as politicians go.
I mean, look, he was more or less a conservative Republican, not necessarily a party line Republican.
He replaced Barry Goldwater with Goldwater's, blessing.
Yeah, I mean, and he would buck the party in somewhat unpredictable ways, not always on kind of classic left-right issues, but often issues like campaign finance and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. I'm torn between a few different things, one of which is kind of like, look, if someone dies, then you're allowed to put a greater weight on the positive aspects, so it's not like I'm trying to, but obviously he's being lionized for many reasons, including his heroism, but also the fact that he is such a contrast to Trump and the notion of decency, and people forget that in some ways, the seminal event that, I don't know if you would want to say kind of launched Trump's campaign, but when he trashed McCain's heroism and he actually remained steady or even increased in polls, it was kind of like the original sin, I suppose, right? Where that was an event that people thought, oh, this is going to tank him. There's no way he can survive this, right? And then 13 different other things, right? But that was the first real event that was okay, something is different with this GOP electorate. People like us were slow to recognize it, but something is different with Trump. He kind of can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue proverbially and get away with it, so this is different.
The New York Times obit, which was one of these just massive, really impressive, sweeping obits, spent a long time on Trump and McCain. Claire, how much do you think the Trump-McCain era, this final chapter of McCain's career, is going to color the way we look at him long term?
Well, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the most defining periods of his life, his early experiences as a prisoner of war and his later experiences as this sort of, 30-year veteran fighting for a party that doesn't really exist anymore, are going to be the lasting impressions that we have of McCain. I mean, his vote on skinny repeal, basically killing Republicans' chances to repeal Obamacare, was purposefully dramatic. I mean, I think one thing to remember is McCain loved being in the spotlight. He loved media members. One of the reasons why he became kind of a thing in 2000 was because he led a bunch of reporters on the Straight Talk Express and he talked to them. He could shoot the shit. And I think people kind of gleaned that and liked it because, I mean, listen, John McCain was a politician. All politicians bullshit. Right. They say things, they manipulate positions, they manipulate words. But McCain seemed a little bit more willing to kind of say what he actually thought. He was a guy who had a temper. People with tempers often say things, often shoot from the hip. But I think the Trump criticism kind of tied the essence of McCain up in where the essence of the Republican Party was. Trump was attacking
that version of the party. That
version of the party. I mean, in my write-up, I called McCain sort of an honorary member of the greatest generation because he came back from an incredibly unpopular war. He had spent 5 years in pretty terrible prison conditions. And Trump spent, as people pointed out, Trump once called avoiding STDs in Manhattan, his version of Vietnam.
I'd forgotten about that.
So those are incredibly...
That's a good line.
Oh, my God.
So to bring that, to 2018... and to watch those two people with incredibly different lives, one of whom lost the presidency, one of whom won the presidency for this Republican Party. Man, can you get a starker contrast? And I think we should note that McCain asked that Obama and George W. Bush speak at his funeral, and he asked that Trump not attend.
I saw a Slate headline that I thought put it well, which is that McCain was a partisan, but an honorable partisan. Mm-hmm. And Trump is just kind of a nihilist as far as politics go. It's a big difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, if McCain is the Republican that Democrats sort of want to deal with.
Well, his approval rating is higher among Democrats than among Republicans.
Yeah, but the collection of okay, I think Democrats have operated on the working assumption, which is obviously maybe not been a successful strategy, that the other party is acting in good faith, and McCain, I think, embodies that. Although again, he voted with Trump less often than most Republicans. He still voted with Trump. What's it in our rating system? 85 or 86% of the time or something. But
McCain took positions too against torture that kind of endeared him to the Democratic set, right? And obviously his fierce and obvious Trump hatred.
Right. And there is something to be said for the way you comport yourself. There's your positions, and then there's just the kind of comedy of how you go about things. Micah, very quickly, what comes next? Sort of nuts and bolts. How does he get replaced? Will his replacement kind of change the agenda on the Senate? I mean, what are the sort of practical politics in 2018 fall out from this?
I don't actually think his So the governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, will appoint
Double D?
Don't
People can use that.
Keep that in, please. The governor of Arizona will appoint a replacement. I saw reports that they will wait till after McCain's funeral to do so. I don't think it changes the Senate math that much in the sense that, McCain had not been in the Senate for a while now. So you will...
Well, it makes it better for Republicans if you get like a party line.
Yeah. No, that's true. So all indications are that, they will appoint a sort of reliable Republican in McCain's stead. And so in that sense, you're probably replacing someone who did buck the party occasionally with someone who's less likely to.
That is a competitive seat. I mean, first of all, if I can be a little editorial, it is kind of silly that you have to wait 2.5 years to have an election. In the House, any vacancy is replaced with an election immediately. You don't have an interim appointment. Arguably, it should be the reverse, right? In the House, one House seat doesn't matter that much, so just wait until the next election. Whereas in the Senate, you should hold the seat open until you actually are able to have an election. But that notwithstanding, it's a little bit tricky because it's going to be another competitive seat in 2020. In general, being an appointed incumbent, so in our model, we treat appointed incumbents as not being incumbents, really, right? That if you haven't actually been elected by the voters, you don't necessarily benefit all that much. But there is some strategy there where do you want someone who's reliably read? Do you want someone who can win a tough Senate race in 2020? Do you want someone who is a relative of John McCain, perhaps? One advantage of waiting until later this week is that you'll have had the primary in Arizona. So if for some reason the establishment candidate McSally loses that primary, which is not likely but possible, then you could appoint McSally to that seat. And so you have like various ways that could be played. But most of them actually, frankly, benefit the Republican Party in the short term, or Trump at least.
That is an excellent segue, Nate. Thank you for doing that, because we are going to talk about the primary in Arizona and the primary in Florida, which are coming up tomorrow, Tuesday. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by WeWork. Whether you're a team of 2 or 200 at WeWork, space matters. From single desk solutions and innovative amenities to flexible private offices designed to grow along with your headcount, WeWork gives your business the space you need to connect, focus, build, and succeed. WeWork now has over 280 locations across more than 70 cities in 24 countries around the world, making it the perfect partner for your next satellite office, regional headquarters, or remote employees. Your team members spend over a third of their lives in your office space, so why not make it exceptional? Everything from IT and maintenance to security, cleaning, wellness programming, and cold brew on tap is handled by WeWork. Let's be honest, that's the most important part. Great coffee right there on hand. WeWork provides the intentional design, infectious energy, and outstanding service your team needs in order to just show up and do what they do best. Visit WeWork.com right now to find a location near you today. All right, we're back, and as you heard Nate mention, there is a election in Arizona tomorrow, also an election in Florida, both states having primaries for their Senate race. Let's start there with Arizona. Someone want to take us on a tour of what to expect tomorrow?
Arizona has been an interesting political state in in the past couple of years. This Republican primary features Martha McSally, who is a member of Congress. It features Kelly Ward, who ran against John McCain in 2016 and is seen as fringy Trumpy. And then, of course, it features Sheriff Joe, who is also seen as a little fringy Trumpy, but that is also a portion of the Arizona electorate that's kind of been there for a long time, because Joe Arpaio has been elected by the people of Arizona for quite some time, having pretty screwed up prison conditions and sort of running on, again, these like race-baiting nationalist sort of campaigns. McSally is leading, and that is who is expected to win. I think Arpaio kind of got in. Arpaio and is sort of the spoiler to Kelly Ward, who again is like this perma candidate. And then, McSally will likely win and face Kyrsten Sinema, who is kind of a conservative-ish Democrat. And that will be an interesting race, I think.
And Kyrsten, by the way, great spelling on that. Kyrsten. I like that.
I like her last name, Sinema. On the GOP primary, though, if McSally wins and she's the favorite, she's done a pretty good job of not letting Ward claim all the Trumpiness. So you have really 3 GOP candidates who are like flavors of Trumpiness. So
you kind of have to embrace that now in Arizona.
Yeah, particularly in Arizona.
It's that kind of state.
Yeah.
Nate, did you hint before the break that McSally might not win because the last few polls have her up 20, up 8, up 9, up 13?
Well, Joey.
Yes?
You know one thing you can't trust, man? You can't trust polls of a Senate primary. I mean,
Look, not all of us have spent the week in Maine knee deep in Senate polling. So tell us what you found.
No, look, polls of presidential primaries aren't that reliable, and so, I mean, it wouldn't be like it would be a big surprise if she lost. It would not be the world's biggest surprise, though, right? Because you don't have that much polling. I mean, I think pollsters kind of gave up on the race after it seemed like it wasn't as exciting as they were hoping for. But, if turnout is really low and like only the kind of Trump loyalists come out, right? But, it is a little bit listless where both Arpaio and Ward don't really seem to have much momentum. So it would be a big shock if she lost. But you can't look at sporadic polling and say, oh, I'm going to go to my grave certain that she's going to win. You're going to have to read the 538.com live blog to confirm that.
But, and by the way, if McSally lost, then you're either having Ward or Arpaio as the Republican candidate, which is amazing news for Kirsten Sinema, who wants to run against
one of those two.
It would be as close to throwing away a Senate seat as you can get for Republicans. They would really be hurting their chances.
Florida. Micah, what's on the docket tomorrow in the great state of Florida?
The headline race there is also the Senate race between
and the gubernatorial primary on the general.
No, sure. So I'll do Senate, you do gubernatorial.
The goobs.
The goobs. The incumbent senator there, Bill Nelson, Democrat, is kind of in trouble. It's in surprising trouble. I'd actually be curious to hear people's thoughts on why. But he's likely to face Rick Scott, who is Florida's current governor and who has a lot of money and a lot of name recognition. And all indications are that it's a close race. Why that race is so close, why does Nelson seem to be in more trouble than Manchin?
I was speaking with a couple of swing voters who happen to be my aunt and uncle who live in Florida. I think the feeling is that it's a combination of Scott having performed well in kind of traditional gubernatorial duties. So after
the Pulse shooting.
Shootings and hurricanes and stuff like that, right? Kind of the bread and butter act of governing. And it's a sense that Nelson has passed his prime and has lost his fastball. I mean, I think, in a state that's purplish, although Florida outside of presidential race is a little bit more red than people realize, right? But you have a purple, more or less, state in a really blue environment, and you have an incumbent. You kind of have to have both, I think, Nelson be a weak candidate and Scott be a strong candidate to make that race competitive. With that said, I would guess that when we launch our Senate model, the kind of fundamentals part of it is going to be hey, you got an incumbent, blue year, really, is it going to be, you could imagine Nelson only winning by 2 points, but, I know there are a lot of Senate races that, the other ones in New Jersey, where Democrats shouldn't have to, sweat it, but maybe do, potentially.
Yeah, I think a lot of these Senate races also come down to, with Manchin, for instance, in West Virginia, I think the Manchin name has recognition beyond just Joe Manchin. Your family plays into this, and I think that's a little bit with the Rick Scott thing. It's this state level reputation that goes beyond the math that we do, which is what's the perception.
Oh, Claire throwing shade at our math.
Math,
not our math, just math in general. Screw math.
To the girls listening to this podcast, do well in calculus. Don't listen to me about math.
Just to be clear, Tuesday is the primary.
I know.
Right.
We're talking about the general here.
And we're talking about the general because Nelson and Scott are virtually assured of winning the primaries. Yeah. The interesting primary is governor.
The gubernatorial Democratic side of things. So you've got Gwen Graham and Philip Levine as kind of the top two people. So Philip Levine is the mayor of Miami Beach. And then this guy, Andrew Gillum, who is a Bernie-backed type, is the mayor of Tallahassee. Gwen Graham is kind of a more centrist Democrat. She is a woman, as people named Gwen typically are. And I think that's...
That was such a weird thing to say.
This is the kind of trenchant analysis we come for here at 5:30.
So I'm a thousandaire.
Let me actually look this gender breakdown of name Gwen.
With Martha McSally, by the way, if she were a man with the last name McSally, that would be confusing.
Or the first name Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gwen Graham, I think, is seen as sort of, she could maybe win perhaps some of these, let's say, disillusioned conservative women who are maybe leaving Trump a little bit. Would she be a person that they would vote for in the general? That's kind of her thing. Also, she's a woman in the year that we have deemed the year of the woman. That's kind of the Florida thing. I mean, there's also a couple other candidates, so it's a little bit of a crowded
It's like a
field.
billionaire.
Yeah, you've got some. I mean, it's Florida, so there's like property billionaires, blah blah blah.
Jeff Green is the billionaire. He
Jeff
spent,
Green,
like,
he was a
ton of
basketball
money.
player.
Yeah.
Is a basketball player.
Not the same
Not that Jeff Green, though.
I know.
Yeah.
That guy's still
I
getting
know,
paid by
guys.
the Thunder or something.
I get it.
Okay, we have some previews coming up on the site. Is that right? And then we will be live blogging this. Is that correct?
Yeah, preview going up tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning. So read that. Nathaniel Rakich will have lots of information for you to look at. And then we'll live blog that night. We'll launch at like 7 and we'll go till we have winners.
This is probably also a good time to mention that there is a Model Talk episode coming on Thursday with Galen and Nate. So Nate sort of mentioned briefly that he's working on the next models. But so if you have any questions, I'll just throw this out there now. If you have any questions about the house model, now that we've been living with it for 10 days or so, a couple weeks, you can email podcast@538.com and they will take them on Thursday. But let's leave it there. Let's stop talking elections and let's start debating. It is time for our second ever 538 Debate-O-Rama, at least the second officially sanctioned Debate-O-Rama. I feel like we often just fall into 538 debates. You may remember that about a month ago, we debated President Trump's relationship with Russia. Today's question is, how should Democrats approach the issue of impeachment? Last week, we had a guilty plea from Michael Cohen and a guilty verdict for Paul Manafort. Democrats are getting the question plenty from the press, so we're going to debate from a strategic perspective what Democrats should do. Basically, what's going to happen is we've been each assigned a position to argue. We're going to each go around and make an opening statement. Then there will be cross-examination after that opening statement. And then at the end, we'll all discuss, and each person will be able to make one closing argument. Everyone on board with that? That's the format?
It vaguely resembles the format of high school debate.
Okay. Let's get into this debate. And we're each going to go around and say which position we will be arguing, and then we will start. This was somewhat randomly assigned, and I am going to go first, as I did last time. And I will be arguing that Democrats should be talking impeachment now and campaign on impeachment in this midterm cycle.
And you have a minute and a half.
I have a minute and a half. So, Claire, you're going to be after me.
Great. My debate topic is stay quiet and plan on impeaching after the midterms.
Okay.
Stay quiet during the midterms and impeach after.
Third will be Nate with...
I'm saying let Mueller be your North Star. Wait for the Mueller report to be filed and then make a determination as to what to do.
And Michael will be going last, arguing that...
They should not impeach Trump.
Period.
Before 2020.
Right. So wait and let 2020 decide, basically.
Well, that might be part of my argument, or maybe not. But my position is do not impeach Trump before 2020.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I'm up first. First, let me just point out that last time we did this,
This is part of your 90 seconds.
No, it's not. I'm just pointing out that last time I was tasked with arguing that there was no collusion whatsoever, and now I'm tasked with arguing that they should start impeachment right now. That's range.
That is range.
Yeah. I'm displaying. Okay.
Snaps.
Okay, on your mark.
Thank you.
Get set. Go.
I believe that Democrats should openly and aggressively discuss the impeachment of Donald Trump on two fronts. First, it is the moral thing to do, and second, it is in fact good political strategy right now. The moral case for impeaching Trump is self-evident. Just this past week placed several straws on the already broken camel's back. Manafort is probably going to end up in jail. Cohen is opening his Rolodex, and we all know that no matter what string Robert Mueller decides to tug on, the whole f***ing sweater is going to come undone. The president is corrupt. His behavior in office is reprehensible. And I turn here to the words of Lindsey Graham in 1999 talking about Bill Clinton. You don't have to be convicted of a crime to lose your job in this constitutional republic. Impeachment is not about punishment. Impeachment is about cleansing the office. Now, why is this good political strategy now? Because this midterm is already about impeachment. Let's face it, the fate of the Trump presidency is the central issue in this election, so why not talk about it? Voters don't need to be shielded from the consequences of this election. Any voter who would be turned off by so-called extreme talk of impeaching Trump either hasn't been paying attention to politics at all or wasn't really going to vote for a Democrat anyway. The goal of a midterm is to energize your base. What energizes the Democratic base more than forceful opposition to the Trump presidency?
Time's up.
No, I'm going to take 10 more seconds.
Oh,
But points,
wow,
points
taking
deducted.
liberties. Inflexibility.
Democrats, don't get too cute like you always do and try and play it safe. Stand for something. Embrace impeachment. Talk it now. Talk impeachment forever.
You sold that. I feel like you believe that.
I don't really believe that.
Okay,
but I
sold it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sold it.
Is this where we get to cross Jody? Or?
No, yes. So now you get some time for cross-examination.
Jody, don't you really risk coming off to swing voters as an incredibly fringe party and ultimately damage yourself? You might win virtue signaling points in certain parts of the country, but you lose the parts of the country that you need to win back the Congress. And ultimately, you shoot yourself in the foot for the virtue signaling.
So I just think, as I said, that the backlash to talking impeachment is an overblown storyline. Anyone who would feel that way is probably either not going to vote in this midterm because it's a midterm and it's all about the bases, or is probably going to vote Republican anyway. And there is actually polling to back this up. So there hasn't been a ton of polls about impeachment, but in a recent Morning Consult poll, 35% of respondents said that they would be much more or somewhat more likely to vote for a candidate who talked about impeachment, and 32% said that they would be somewhat or much less likely. So those kind of even each other out. And then if you think about the rest of the people who said that it either wouldn't matter or they're on the fence, which direction do you think that's going to break in the next couple of months? Away from Trump is corrupt and we should not hold him accountable, or towards that? So I just think that, every sign we have is pointing towards you should be more forceful and get out ahead of this storyline.
I wonder how you reconcile a Quinnipiac poll, for example, found a majority of voters would not like to see Democrats impeach Trump if they win the House. So the polling numbers, how do you reconcile that with the polling numbers you just cited? Sure, the hardcore Democrats want impeachment. Hardcore Republicans don't. Everyone else is in the middle, right? But those people in the middle, I think the polls show, lean towards not impeaching. They just don't feel strongly about it.
So I would argue those people who are in the middle and maybe don't feel so strongly aren't the people you should be focusing on during a midterm.
While you might turn out your base during the midterms, and that might be an election that's based on the base, you then have 2 years until 2020, and you have fully identified to voters that the Democratic Party is everything that the middle-of-the-road voter fears. It is embracing socialism. It is a party of extremism. It wants to throw the country back into the most partisan devils of the Clinton era, and they're doing it, hardcore right from the start, and you're alienating people who are in the middle of the road.
If this were a presidential election, I think this argument would be easier. But, there are a ton of districts where the Democratic base is not enough, right? There are a lot of districts where Democrats running will need middle-of-the-road voters and some Republicans. Take Manchin, take Claire McCaskill, Missouri, right? And in the House, too, our forecast shows a kind of really diverse set of districts are on the board. I think maybe, let's suppose you're right that going full on impeachment energizes the Democrats. That probably helps you in, 30% of the districts you want to win, but it might hurt you in the rest.
All right. So let's move on to the next argument, and then we'll get a chance to do closing arguments as we go. So Claire, tell us what you will be arguing, and then you are on the clock.
I'm arguing that the Democrats should stay quiet on impeachment through the midterms, and then after that, plan on impeaching in the House.
Claire's going to advocate for lying.
I will also
in politics. Jeez.
Sins of omission, Micah. I will also be timing myself, Nate. So no funny business. The Democrats need to win a wide map in the midterms. They're playing in a lot of states, and they've nominated people that fit the districts that, in some places, like in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district, support people who lean far to the left. But in many other parts of the country, those kind of politics are abhorrent, and they frighten people a little bit. Democrats need to win the House. It is an absolute must in 2018, and they have to do everything politically feasible to do that. That means catering candidate quality and candidate tenor to certain districts. But once the House is won, which, as we all know, is probably where the numbers are leaning, Democrats need to position themselves for 2020. Currently, talk of impeachment falls to the Democratic fringe. Unfortunately, People like Maxine Waters, who have been calling for impeachment since Trump first stepped into office, have in some ways lessened the impact of calls for impeachment. But once the Democrats are in power in the House, whomever is Speaker, perhaps it's Nancy Pelosi, perhaps it is invigorated new young blood, they can then lend a note of seriousness to the impeachment argument by calling on the different developments in the Mueller investigation, particularly the ones that have to do with Michael Cohen. And this, I think, helps them charge up their base for 2020, but also to those voters who are disillusioned with Trump, such as, for instance, conservative women who might be leaning more towards voting Democrat. They can play on, in a serious way, Trump's real failures in the country. And that's, I think, the smart strategy to do.
Claire, advocating for lying to the American people.
Oh, Micah, it's not lying.
What's the lie?
It's not lying, Micah. Not at all.
You are advocating that Democrats...
I am saying that there are serious developments in the Mueller investigation that will continue to roll into the news.
It's lying.
And that politicians it would be dereliction of duty for them to ignore them any longer after November.
It's like when we say, hey, Micah, everyone else in the office is getting drinks after work. Do you want to come? And you say maybe.
And I say, I'll
you say
meet
maybe,
you there.
knowing full well that maybe means no. It's that kind of lie.
Okay, well,
it's not.
So you're saying proof of that?
Nate is butchering my argument. It is not a lie. It is simply a responsible decision by public servants.
But the decision's been made.
It is simply a responsible decision by public servants to follow a line of argumentation. Would you want your attorney to go out guns blazing in a fit of passion during a negotiating session with, in a mediation session? That's not what this is for. The midterms are for mediation, for meeting the person halfway through, and presidential elections are guns blazing, but serious-minded guns blazing.
That you would mislead the American people, that you would advocate such an extreme path of really obstruction of justice, almost.
Micah, it's unprecedented times post-November.
I would impeach you, Claire, for this argument.
Claire, let me ask you this: if you're sort of arguing that impeachment is maybe not super popular right now and it's not a path towards actively winning this election, why does it all of a sudden become magically popular after the election?
A bastardization of my argument, Jody. I am not at all arguing that impeachment isn't a real option that we should take seriously right now. But I am arguing that we should play smart politics. Democrats are terrible at politics, and I am arguing that they should be smart once and for all.
But don't voters know that it's a possibility? Why, just not talking about it makes it disappear?
No. There are developments that will occur in the investigation that have already occurred with the Michael Cohen verdict and that will continue to come down. Convictions, whatever it might be, cooperation agreements. And I think that voters know the difference between a lie, which is not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is we're focusing right now on winning the midterms. And then voters know, listen, this has gone beyond the pale. We really need to rein things in, and that will happen as the investigation inevitably unfolds. But first, I really think we need to focus on doing the voters justice and winning these districts, winning the House, baby steps, and then we take the next turn. But it's not lying at all, Jody.
What happens if they don't win the House? Do they still talk impeachment?
That's not part of my debate argument, so I won't answer the question.
Oh, I see. Okay. Good to know. All right. We are halfway through our arguments. Nate is up next. We're going to hear his opening statement in a minute. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by Upstart. Debt. Some have a lot, some have a little, and the vast majority of us have some. But the path to financial freedom can look awfully bleak when you have high interest debt. And if your FICO score isn't that great, it can make breaking out of the revolving debt cycle harder than it needs to be. Thankfully, Upstart is revolutionizing the process of personal lending. Upstart offers personal loans, but they're not like the ones your bank or credit union provides. That's because Upstart goes beyond the traditional FICO scores when assessing your credit worthiness. Yep, they actually reward you based on your education and your job history in the form of a smarter interest rates. 2 minutes is all it takes to go online, find your Upstart rate. Checking your Upstart rate is always free, and it will not affect your credit. The best part is once your loan is approved, the funds will be transferred to you the very next day. The next day, over 100,000 people have used Upstart to pay off credit card bills, fund their wedding, or simply to make a large purchase. Now it's your turn. Hurry to upstart.com/politics and find out how low your Upstart rate is. Checking your rate takes only 2 minutes. It won't affect your credit. That's upstart.com/politics. Today's podcast is also brought to you by SeatGeek. The summer is winding down. Perhaps your vacations and travel is over, but now it's time to find some fun things to do right at home. For instance, football is back. Why not take in a game? SeatGeek is the smartest and easiest way to get tickets to every game all season long. If you aren't a football fan, maybe you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out, or you need to find the perfect gift, well, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. By searching multiple ticket sites and grading every ticket based on value, SeatGeek helps you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. It doesn't end with sports. SeatGeek has plenty of tickets to concerts, comedy, and theater, too. Just looking at New York, where I live, coming up in the next few days, there's a concert with Drake and Migos. You could go to that. Or a few days later, if you want to head out to Jones Beach, there's a concert with Judas Priest and Deep Purple. Or maybe you want to go to both. Seriously, if you're the kind of person who would go to the Drake Migos concert and then a couple days later go to the Judas Priest Deep Purple concert, you should let me know. We should hang out. Right now, you can get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code 538. That's the numbers 538 today. That's promo code 538 for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. SeatGeek, life's an event. We have tickets. All right, Nate, you're up here. Everyone,
I'm timing Nate.
All right, timer
I'm not
for the
gonna be
loudest
the fool.
possible. You were the one asking for 2 minutes.
You know, like in the
before we started.
Manafort trial where Manafort didn't call any defense witnesses.
Yeah, how'd that turn out for him?
I
No,
guess
but
it didn't
that's
turn
really
out well.
that's really common.
Yeah. It
Okay, Nate,
because they were all the contrarian, like, actually, it's a good sign that Manafort. Anyway.
Okay, Nate, you are on the timer. I will be giving you just a little non-verbal heads up.
Okay,
when
I'm
your
going to
time
time
is-
myself.
Okay.
You know.
All right, so Nate, tell us what you will be arguing, and then start the timer and
It's a
start
big
your
clock
argument.
right there.
So I'm going to argue that the Democrats should wait for the results of the Mueller investigation, as well as wait for the midterm is embedded within that, because they're not going to have, I don't think, a verdict on the Mueller investigation before the midterm. Beep. Okay. So I feel like this inherently is kind of a commonsensical case to make. Impeachment is a political process. Right now, polling suggests that impeachment is not a terribly popular idea, where if you look at approval ratings for Donald Trump, they're roughly negative 10, right? 10 points more disapproval than approval. If you look at polls about impeachment, it almost flips that, where about, 40% want to impeach, 50% do not. And so all of a sudden, all those swing voters, the people who might win you the election in 2020, who are essential to 2018, flip from being for you to against you. And I would argue that's for good reason. Impeachment is a gigantic step. It's one branch of government intervening and saying we're going to overturn the popular will. The public has not yet had a chance to weigh in. Obviously, the midterms is an opportunity to do that, but 2020 is also an opportunity to do that. So it's kind of like both in terms of like what sets a good precedent. I think being conservative with the powers of impeachment is good. But more importantly, politically, right now, I think it makes Trump potentially sympathetic. And there are two things that could reverse that. Number one is as Mueller comes down with actual findings, or as Trump starts to pardon people that he shouldn't pardon, tries to fire people that he shouldn't fire, and you have like real meat on those bones, but you shouldn't use impeachment in the marginal cases. Also, politically, I'm not sure it helps Democrats either in the short term or the long term. By the way, there's also the fact that if you impeach Trump, you get another conservative Republican named Mike Pence. Instead, they might actually rather run against. So I'm saying follow Mueller, follow the midterms, and follow the polls.
Wow.
Oh, good close.
Yeah, good close. Yeah.
Too bad it didn't count because it was over time.
Anyone want to cross-examine?
So, Nate, implicit in your argument is that there is no case on the merits for impeachment right now.
There is a case, but it's a political process, and the party is allowed to wield it to their advantage. And also the case, I presume, would get stronger. I mean, it's kind of like a catch-22, or the opposite of a catch-22 is, right? Either the case gets stronger, or there's not that much there.
Throw 22.
It's a release 11.
Release 11. Yeah.
Release 11. Okay. That sounds like some terrible Blink 180.
So on this question of it being a political process, why do you think that the results of Mueller's investigation are going to bolster the political argument for impeaching Trump when we have Manafort, we have Cohen every week, the moral and frankly political case against Trump gets stronger and stronger? It feels like that's just going to be one, sort of drop in the bucket.
Well, that hasn't necessarily been true. I mean, you've had a lot of, until fairly recently when things began to reverse again, you actually saw the various investigations of Trump becoming less popular and views splitting more along partisan lines. But again, in this universe where everything about Trump is like 40% favor, 50% oppose. This is the flip side of that. And the public says impeachment is a big, drastic step. It's a political carnival that all the news networks will like, but which is to overturn the will of the electorate when you're having another election again in 2020.
But Nate, isn't it sort of folly to have Mueller, a professed non-political figure, lead the way in an inherently political discussion? Perhaps the reason why 40% of the country is for impeachment and 50% is against it is because the Democrats haven't actually taken a strong line on it, and that maybe 10 or 15% of those 50% who currently don't want to impeach are persuadable, but we're just hanging around for this non-political figure to lead us somewhere that may never happen.
I'm just saying, this is the guy that a majority, actually not a majority of the country, but like a minority of the country and a majority of the Electoral College elected, and to say, you know what, I'm going to essentially nullify the results of that election and put Mike Pence in instead. I mean, that's a very high hurdle to clear, especially in a president's first term. You could argue in a second term that, like, okay, now there is no recourse. He is a lame duck, and therefore the only recourse would be to impeach. But, like, the most likely way that Donald Trump fails to become president is not him being impeached or him resigning. It's him losing to some Democrat in 2.5 years.
Your argument is pretty persuasive, Nate. The big hole in it, I think, is if you think there is a clear case for impeachment now, waiting for Mueller is a big risk. Because if Mueller comes back with nothing, that really hurts your chances for impeachment.
I think it's also not going to work, though, right now. You need to have at least some Republican support for impeachment, right? If you don't have any of that, then it is going to seem inherently partisan, right? You need things to be bad enough where, maybe not even enough where you're guaranteed to have him removed from office, but enough where, like, people are like, okay, this is where the center of opinion is actually that Trump should be impeached. Maybe Republicans are being partisan by hanging on to him, right? And also, like, honestly, until fairly recently, I think we would argue, and you can go back and listen to this podcast, that there was kind of a very random trajectory to all these investigations, right, where you would have something flare up and then it would die down. It does seem to me, kind of since Helsinki, you have had Trump get himself in deeper and deeper trouble, and it kind of finally feels like you actually have some momentum, and it's a dangerous term to use, in the various investigations against him. And by the way, I would not say that you have to wait for Mueller specifically. I'd say you have to wait for some investigation to turn up very serious findings of something the president himself did, and or for the Trump to pardon people who were very central to those investigations, and or for him to fire Mueller or someone else who's central to that investigation. So there are a lot of triggers, but I think we haven't hit any of those triggers yet. Wait for more evidence. Wait for more data. Right now, the polling
you need a stronger case.
Beep, beep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Micah, you are fourth here. You're going to make your argument. We're going to cross-examine, and I think we can all kind of step back and discuss in general what we heard. But go ahead. Tell us the argument you're making, and then we will put you on the clock.
I'm arguing that Democrats should not impeach Trump before 2020. Okay. One, just to be clear, I'm making a political argument, not a moral one, not a precedent one. I'm talking about politics. Why shouldn't they impeach Trump? One, there's a good chance it won't work. No president has ever been removed from office via impeachment. I think 8 presidents have been impeached. 3 were it was actually serious: Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton. None of them were voted out of office by the Senate. So there's a good chance it just won't work. The politics of impeachment, as Nate was getting at, are really hard. Just to give you an example, Trump seems so beleaguered now and unpopular. When Nixon resigned, Nixon's approval rating was in the low 20s. Trump's is in the low 40s. That's to say, there's still a long way to go before Trump is unpopular enough where removal from office, I think, would be politically palatable. Second, impeachment would take a long time, months, maybe even years. One, the political nature of it means you're going to have to bring the country along, right? So you have to show them the evidence, explain the facts. That all takes time. Again, going back to Nixon, Democrats were calling for Nixon's impeachment in the summer of 1972. Articles of impeachment were brought against him at a Judiciary Committee not until 2 years later, August 1974. So combine those two things, and basically you're not going to be able to impeach Nixon until right before the 2020 election. Winning the 2020 election is an easier political lift than impeachment. So if you can't win the 2020 election, you're not going to be able to impeach. And by that point, you got him out of office anyway.
So, Micah, I appreciate your large sweep of history. But what is to say that this is not a truly unprecedented moment? Every kind of indication we have is that this thing is worse and worse at every turn. So why should we look to history and say, oh, well, we haven't impeached people, we haven't removed office? It's not unreasonable that Trump would be removed from office and impeached.
So I don't think my argument rests on the fact that it's impossible for Trump to be impeached. My argument rests on the fact that impeached and removed. My argument rests on the fact that even if that were to happen, the timing would not be that much different from him being voted out of office. And him being voted out of office has all types of side benefits, like no risk of a political backlash, right? So I don't think it's necessary that even if Trump is the black swan and you could successfully remove him via impeachment, there's a safer route to go for Democrats, which is just the election.
This sort of argument about the safer route, you just want Democrats to lie there like flaccid little noodles for the next 2 years, not excite their base, not do anything that the base really wants, and therefore deflate turnout when they actually need to win a 2020 election. I mean, how can you possibly argue that this is a smart strategy for winning 2020? I mean, I'm really flabbergasted by this.
So, hotter heads, people prone to rash actions, I get why those people are really tempted by the impeachment argument. But, some of us have to govern, so to speak.
But the Democrats aren't in power. They can't govern right now. They need to win back power. And simply lying down doesn't really get them anywhere, does it?
Okay, so this is a fair argument that if you're not pushing impeachment, maybe there's a section of the Democratic base that feels like you are, a limp noodle, inert, as Claire put it. I think there are ways to hit Trump short of impeachment that would excite those voters, is what I would say.
Like what?
Censure?
Censure. Micah, let me ask you one other question, which is, isn't this going to tear the Democratic Party apart? I mean, this rift between never Trump versus we need to, find our own agenda as the animating force in the Democratic Party is just going to grow and grow and grow. Aren't the next 2 years just going to see this party just go nuts? And then the 2020 primary is going to go even nutsier if they don't address it now?
If they don't address impeachment?
Impeachment now, yeah. I mean, can't you see an argument over whether to impeach Trump if you delay, tearing the Democratic Party apart?
No. Look, if Mueller comes back with compelling evidence of collusion and Democrats control the House and don't impeach, then I think there will be an uproar. Yes.
Are you sliding into Nate's argument here?
But let me finish. But by that time, I think Democrats will have, a few kind of front-runner candidates for 2020. And it's very hard for people to get mad at you for saying, we're going to put it in the hands of the voters. Okay. And that's what they could say.
I guess you haven't been on the internet lately.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, let's do quick closing arguments and then a very brief just take a step back and discuss what we heard conversation, and then we will start to wrap up. So I will start with a closing argument here. This is going to be these are all going to be pretty short. So my closing argument, again, making the case that Democrats should talk impeachment now. In closing, I will just say, because I know my audience, I will rely on yet another poll. According to CNN, 42% of Americans today think Trump should be impeached. Compare that to the 43% who backed Nixon's impeachment in March of 1974. Listen to that date, March 1974, 3 months before he resigned office. We are at late stage Nixon already. It's time for Democrats to realize that and start talking impeachment. Claire.
All right, this is my closing argument for why the Democrats should stay quiet during the midterms but plan on impeaching Trump after they win the House. And my argument is simple. I'm arguing for a Democratic Party with teeth and with strategy, which is what Democratic voters deserve. A lot of my colleagues here have sort of, in bad faith, said that I am arguing for lying. Not at all. I'm saying that people didn't elect saints to office. They elected people to get things done, and they elected people to strategize. I don't want my divorce lawyer to be an idiot goober, and I don't think you want your senator or your congressman to be that either. So I am arguing that Democrats deserve politicians and the best things that politicians can provide.
Really straw manning goobers there, Claire.
Look, my argument is that there is a genuine decision to make, and that you're going to get lots of information about that decision, including, number one, how big, if at all, is the blue wave in the midterms? Number two, what does Mueller find? Number three, does Trump kind of wind up causing himself harm by firing people or pardoning people that he shouldn't? Right now, impeachment is not a popular move. There's a reasonable chance that it will become one. I think, as Micah says, or will say, the timeline of these things is fairly long. I mean, Nixon won a landslide re-election in 1972, kind of in the midst of how Watergate was unfurling. And lastly, if you're being extremely political about it, the pressure point is when the GOP is arguing amongst itself about what should happen with Trump. If you have a big split within the Democratic Party, then that causes pain, right? But if the pressure point is that within the GOP, it's gotten so bad that they're kind of stuck between supporting impeachment, which, by the way, would tear the Republican Party apart, right? And not impeaching when it looks really bad for them too, and they might have a really bad outcome if they don't lose the House. They might lose the House in 2020. Anyway, wait for the data. Wait for information.
Wait for the data.
Wait for the data.
My closing argument,
On brand.
Beat him in 2020. If you can't do that, you wouldn't be able to impeach him. It's much safer. There's no risk of political backlash. The timing works out the same way anyway. And if you really think Trump is such a threat to the country, then you want to take the safest route to removing him. That's beating him in 2020.
Okay, we are going to spend the last few minutes of this podcast having removed our each arguing our own case
Who won?
hats and talk about who won or who we think made a compelling case or how our minds may be changed. But as you remove those caps, let me point out that I actually polled on Twitter about this over the weekend. And I asked folks, if you were in charge of strategy for the Democratic Party, how would you approach this question? Anyone want to take a guess which of our arguments won among the people?
I think our Twitter followers are pretty knee-jerk liberal, so I would guess
Claire's argument.
Yeah.
The lying one.
So, no, actually, Nate's argument won. About 50% of people said wait until after Mueller.
Interesting.
Then Claire, 23% said that. Then 17% said talk impeachment now. And then 11% said Micah's argument go until 2020.
See, I had the toughest argument. But if you remember, we said we were going to let Tony in the control room decide.
Who won?
So, Tony, who won?
Or Galen, who won? Micah won, he says. What?
What?
That's what
I made the best argument.
that's just
You did
not. True.
not.
Wait a second.
I mean, I think your argument, to be
judge.
fair, I think your argument, funnily enough, found the most number one and number four. I know I was arguing number one, but number one and number four.
Funnily
have the
enough,
most
I found myself incredibly convincing.
No, but just in research.
Wow.
But your argument,
I'm talented.
Your argument about timetable is really interesting. That we're going to be in the 2020 election on November 7th, and so kind of trying to do something in that interim when you're not just sort of putting all your eggs in the election bucket.
I think it's
makes
such
sense.
an unavoidable thing, though, that the Democratic base at some point in the next 2 years is going to call for this.
I think
that that's what's.
Tony was signaling that the timing, I think, is what convinced him, right, Tony?
Yeah.
The best argument against my argument that I made, which is why I constrained it to a political argument at the beginning, is about norms and precedent. And if Mueller comes back and says Trump colluded, you have to impeach him. It's just you'd have to do it, So.
I mean, it does feel, I think this gets to part of Claire's argument as well as mine a little bit, but that this is one of those issues where once again we could look back and see, oh man, Democrats really weren't reading the writing on the wall and weren't embracing the thing that kind of was right there and growing and building.
Well, but this is where I think the argument you had to make falls down is I don't think people are there yet.
Right.
If you're going by Trump's approval or the numbers on impeachment itself, the American people are not ready to remove someone, the president, from office.
As every Nate step we take seems to be pushing in that direction.
I truly do think, though, that once politicians on the Democratic side who are taken more seriously by people and, frankly, by the media argue for impeachment, then I think you see people changing their mind more. I think right now it's seen as a purely fringe thing, and that people have been beating the drum since, January 21st, whenever he was inaugurated. And that if you put more of the Democratic leadership behind it, more weight behind it, then I do think you change some people's minds. I do think people need to be led down the garden path a little bit if they actually want this to happen.
No, I think that's the best argument against kind of Micah and my position, right, is that if you have kind of thought leaders in the party saying, no, impeachment's a fringy extremist solution, and that will be reflected ultimately in what the voters think, as skeptical as voters might be about kind of elite opinion. It's true for a lot of things, right? It's a little circular where people are like, oh, nothing can ever really affect Trump's approval rating. I don't know. Maybe the fact that people keep saying that is part of the reason why you don't see an effect necessarily.
Can I just ask I think it's a fairly obvious question, but like,
how did I win two debates in a row?
Good question. These midterms are hugely consequential for this question, right? If Democrats take back one or both of the chambers, then they have, to use Nate's word, this optionality. And if they don't, they kind of don't. But I mean, that feels like what's really at stake in this election for the fall is
winning
the fate of the Trump presidency, or at least the various paths to the Trump presidency.
Yes. There's a set of outcomes in terms of Mueller's findings in which a GOP-controlled Congress would not impeach, but a Democratic-controlled Congress would. I don't actually think that set of outcomes is that wide or big because, look, Democrats so far have played impeachment conservatively. They've done what Claire was arguing for. You know, if you look at who's talking about impeachment, it's mostly Republicans. It's like Republicans saying, we wrote this on the site. You know, it's like Republicans saying all Democrats can talk about is impeachment because the GOP is trying to rile up its base. But if it comes to so Democrats are playing this conservatively, which I think they have to, and so I don't think they're going to try to remove a president unless they feel like there's a decent chance they'll get 2/3 in the Senate, and they're not going to get 2/3 in the Senate unless they have a decent number of Republicans on board.
I think you need a big revelation from Mueller to turn
exactly
those
right.
people.
So it is true that Democrats winning the House increases the chances of impeachment, both in that it gives them tools to investigate the administration, but also the House impeaches, right? But I still think that even a Democratic-controlled House would be constrained somewhat by the Senate and by the need to bring Republicans, Nate made this point, to bring Republicans along with you to some extent. If it's just viewed as partisan, it's not going to work.
I mean, it's kind of the poker player theory that you want to put your opponents the toughest possible decisions, right? And so, look, right now, if Democrats tried to impeach Trump, it would be a really easy decision for Republicans. They would say, no, this is premature. We haven't even had the Mueller findings come down yet. By the way, the public is against it, and they're probably pretty happy that's galvanizing their base for 2018 and 2020, right? Wait until there's enough pressure where the GOP faces a really hard choice, and they genuinely have to do some thinking. Cory Gardner, who will be up for re-election in 2020, what would he do?
Ron Johnson is our stand-in for the GOP.
Yeah, and remember, by the way, another argument, too, is that if you look at the Senate, 2018 is a really bad nap for Democrats. 2020 is a pretty bad nap for Republicans. It's the echo of 2014. The fact that you have red state Democratic senators are under pressure right now, post-2018, frankly, they'll either have lost or they'll have 5.5 years to wait until their next election. And so in the Senate, which is the key branch here to actually removing him from office, the politics will shift in Democrats' favor between now and post-election, post-midterm.
We're going to leave it there. So what's our question to listeners now? Tell us what you thought. Who won? All right. Nate Silver, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire Malone.
Thanks.
Thanks to you, Micah Cohen.
Tell us who won at 538politics on Twitter.
At 538politics. You can't spell it out.
I'm trying to build up that.
Yeah, that's a good
handle.
feed.
Yeah.
You can also email us, podcast@538.com, or you can tweet any of us if you have questions or comments. Remember, there's a Model Talk coming on Thursday, so if you have wonky questions for Nate and Galen, send those in. My name is Jody Abergang. Galen Druk is our producer. Tony Chow is in the control room. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.